See, I had a wife, beautiful, like you, who tells me I worry too much, who tells me I ought to smile more, who gambles and gets in deep with the sharks. One day they carved her face. We had no money for surgeries. She can't take it. I just want to see her smile again. I just wanted to know that I don't care about the scars. So, I stick a razor in my mouth and do this. Myself. And you know what? She can't stand the sight of me. She leaves. Now I see the funny side. Now I'm always smiling.
Well done.
Now the most depressing point concerning what I'd learned and had been taught, and technically speaking, it had not been taught whether this constituted professional privileged information or not. At least not technically. I had to sort of assume everything was, or, you know, to be on the safe side, assume everything was. But with this, you know, it had been suggested to me that I would consider it a question best pitched to the public. Is the Australian people one better mocked with stories of government concealing alien extraterrestrial presence and abductions on Earth, or has the Doppler effect been refined in its technological method of study over and over and over, yet still not perfected, but made subatomic enough that aspects of human thought are now studyable? And if so, can they run test sequences? You'll notice when you listen to reports from ufologists who essentially take a whole bunch of UFO abductee reports and collate the data together, then one common thread they seem to find is that reported abductions rarely occur during a work shift, which is interesting. They're usually either in a car or in a bed. So the Doppler effect it applies to all forms of waves. Look it up in a physics textbook. You'll find it applies to Hertzian waves, which are sound waves, light waves. Granted, the observer effect as a variable proves things like if you study light in a certain way, with a certain technique, light will appear to be particles. Studied in other ways, it'll appear to be waves. Now, what's going on now is that it's very much that bread and circuses give the. The thing is, we aren't a culture who is ill prepared for knowledge and awareness of this type of technology. We have Big Brother made into a series of a bunch of people who's to be evicted from a house, but based on what George Orwell's novel. author of 1984, Animal Farm, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which looked at the control of... Now, please note that the one thing I'm not doing in recording this is making some universal monist claim that there's no such thing as mental illness. I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is that science is empirical. So the less and less something is backed by empiricism, the less and less likely you are right in calling it a science altogether. It's like, at least with tarot cards, I could show you the cards. You know, there's the famous Rorschach or ink blot test where someone holds up a card with some spluttered black ink on it and asks you, what do you see? And, you know, you say a butterfly, and it's, you know, I mean, these tests can be simply, the test questions could be answered with deceit, falsely. Like, but what the fuck they think they're testing for? Seeing what you want to see is one explanation I've heard for the Rorschach test. But essentially put, the less and less empirical something gets and methodical, then the harder it is to call it a science. Now, those trying to do so anyway, well, it's in that regard that I would say I have more respect for the Christian who at least knows how to fly by their own true flag. It's there's some greed now in the tone of some modern apologists who are trying to do things like, it reminds me of a joke a former mentor made, that maybe the Big Bang was God farting. And I said, well, that couldn't be possible. He would have turned the other cheek and none of us would be here. But, you know, with the Doppler effect applying to all kinds of waves, light waves, sound waves, a quantum field, I'm not even sure if in terms of technology and apparatus involving that needs to be the shape of a radar dish with an antenna is necessary to generate a quantum field, you know, and if so, what would be the proper span, how much terrain, geography could be spanned by one radar. The fact that it's more like the censorship, religious hysteria of the time, like how it was once louche to say the word breast in the marketplace. If you were thinking of like a breast of chicken, if you were to go and order some poultry, it was once taboo to say the word breast, and then now it's the word cunt, and now it's the word satellite. And you're paranoid if you say the word satellite. And, I mean, there are many of them, by the way, and you know, it can be a little embarrassing to emerge from that religious cocoon and go, well, maybe there was more dignity in sucking my thumb or holding a teddy bear than praying to a satellite or a bunch of them. But it's precisely what Niels Bohr and Einstein were worried about, only they were worried about the technologies built on their theories, relativity and quantum mechanics being, how am I doing? Been put in the hands of religious idiots, and essentially Sam Harris, though he hasn't mentioned specifically this type of technology, but he's talked about, you know, people with PhDs being jihadists and essentially knowing how to operate some very, very, very complicated technology, yet still having the belief that they're going to get 72 virgins as a reward in the next life if they kill themselves. So this is a sort of disastrous. It's a real recipe for disaster. I happen to know from. See, Gary Kantz has a perennial frustration with people he'll dismiss as dreamers. He himself is a Freemason. So why he's got a problem with dreamers as a neurological base for discrimination when he's a Freemason is beyond me. I think he's, I suppose maybe he was living the dream of being Robert D. Costello that week that I got told that he had contracted shingles, which I later learnt was some form of herpes. That's what I do think would be a scientific improvement on Gary Kant's behalf, instead of harbouring this abject and unjustifiable mutter under the breath and occasionally raise the voice in loss of temper, abject frustration with dreamers, is, insofar as his studies are concerned, cease applying the technology on the grounds that it's doing more harm than it is succeeding until the not only the tech is made more safer, but the results more accurate and the margins for error more narrow. Now, my point, this cross-connotativity of a scientist and a religionist such as a Freemason is disastrous. Better be one or the other, and the simple reason is all you need to say here is you understand what is involved, what steps are involved in conducting a study and in the application of liberal scientific method to arrive at a hypothesis, a testable hypothesis, a theory, and then in a sense, it's even pushing skepticism quite far. Science can't tell us what's true. It can only keep eliminating the false. I've heard it said, but it's the most precious thing we have. Einstein called the scientific method. Now, Freemasonry will tell you some of the most gayest and outrageously stupid claims that there'd be more dignity in the imaginations of the imaginings of primary schoolers, more intellectual honesty too, because at least they would consider themselves to be playing. These men think that they, the justification I've heard them given is, well, so what if we have morals? That you don't have morals, you have a theistic religion involving the positing of whole existences of supernatural beings with a bunch of various attributes that the application of your own scientific study method will have eliminated to what you would call a false hypothesis or an invalid or a theory without merit and therefore not worth believing in. Now, if it's not worth believing in, but you're believing it anyway and being a scientist, then you even mustn't surely know in your own conscience and in the back of your own mind you're really just paving the way to future errors when you should be working in the other direction and eliminating the likelihood of future errors occurring whatsoever. I've been trying to understand what the tone or mood of Freemasons are in relation to their own secrecy. And I have no way to know whether they unify together. I understand they can involve a bit of a gentleman's club amongst business owners, but to think of them as a cult, or I would first think of films like Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, and I think I've got no conclusive proofs to know these things about them, and I wouldn't attend one of their services if I were invited. But they say, left to their own devices, good people will do good things, bad people will do bad things. But if you want good people to do bad things, then you will need religion, and it is not possible to want to work in a division of healthcare where people are trusting their health and safety in more ways than one, often in the hands of your business, and say, well, and make such strong claims and statements to the people of Canberra, as Gary and Roger do with their "We know what matters, everybody needs their capital chemist" slogans, and have the audacity to prove that they're fit for what everyone needs, unless that's a standard they're prepared to live up to in some demonstrable way. Where, as far as I'm concerned, they haven't got off square one and passed the test of, can you prove what a bullshit religion is? Yet you'll find, ironically, what they like to do is round up Christians and put Christians into psych wards. That seems to be the way they get their kicks. They have views about God. They seem to believe in the existence of a theistic God. They seem to think that Lucifer, or Satan, is the victor, or the one that wins or beats God, and that Jesus is just your typical martyr, like a suicide bomber. So I neither agree with the Christians nor the Freemasons, and I've said this a number of times before, but what I'm saying is absolutely disgusting and a definite chronological retrogress. It's like is really this question: what gives them the right, aside from some chest thumping theological bullshit that they're gonna spout off, or some Masonic chants? What gives them the right to not be psychologists, not be psychiatrists, not be doctors, not be police, not be military, yet represent to their own employees in the confidentiality trust of an employment arrangement, that the owner of the pharmacy is a known friend of Queen Elizabeth II and the monarchy. When such words may have been said as part of some private reservation of a test, or a sociological study. Now, and it's against Australia's constitution that such studies could ever be conducted without the express consent of the citizen to begin with. But it's also admitted that the Freemasons, who are believers in the extermination or abolishment of the weak, that the weak deserve to perish more or less, and that things like population culling are the fitting job of a Freemason. Really, what happens here is that when you ask for justifications for this, they try to sound Darwinianly impressive, and they point at behavior in the animal kingdom, become zoologists and evolutionary biologists for a brief moment and say, you know, what goes on between our business and how we treat these people here and how we round these people up for the psych ward. It's just like how you'll see this species run from, you know, or prey on this species here, or, you know, it's just like how the fly has it can see 4 times slower than but the closer it gets to the zebra, it can't make out it can't tell the zebra apart from its surroundings because of its stripes. And, you know, it's all, what they do is they appeal to observations that the likes of which Darwin made in the animal kingdom pertaining to animal behavior, as if it were morally prescriptive for us, or for us as competing businesses. And that really isn't what, well, yeah, so yeah, the closer the fly with its sight at 4 times slower than that of the human eye, as it flies closer to the striped zebra, the zebra stripes blur black and white into the surrounding environment, and the zebra becomes a little harder to see. And what essentially goes on when business man's nature being to compete is, you know, you might question further what is meant by this and how far is this to be taken. Analogies are drawn constantly in the corporatocracy, in the corporate world. The big fish eat the little one, you know. On the one hand, these are religious people that see themselves as spiritual entities that are they would consider themselves, especially when their justification for why they're part of this Freemason cult is it so that they can so what if we have morals, is to use Roger Toll's own words. Yet, you know, when fucking someone over with the full force of his company, his justification is to really point at, you know, how a baby tiger might wrestle and eat a squirrel, and that's to use an example of behavior in the animal kingdom as if it were suitable parable, if you like, of prescriptive moral behavior for human beings, or at least human beings organized in groups or as corporate entities. That is not a philosophy that Charles Darwin was interested in, and that is something that David Hume opposed. The is-ought distinction was reduced to to the idea of monkey see, monkey do, which David Hume argued we simply, if we want to survive as a species, we can't be thinking in those terms. You can't assume what you ought to believe or do just from what is apparent around you, which is to promote questioning. However, you'll also find Gary Cairns and Roger Toll will express views in opposition to the faculty of curiosity as well. So what they end up making their own staff wear, essentially, although they won't admit to this either, is a whole bunch of errors and problems associated with their tech, their metric, and their study methods, and they want to absolve themselves somehow by offending their own employees. It's really quite disgusting. And in scientific terms, the word faith is to assume. Certain dictionaries define faith as belief or trust that does not question or ask for proof. When you've got scenarios involving Jesus in the Bible where he helps a sick person, or a woman with leprosy or something, and says, ye of little faith, he did not mean, in you I sense that you don't have enough faith that I exist. Like, that wasn't Jesus. That wasn't the nature of Jesus' discussion with these people. If these documents have veracity and are reliable, the people that he obviously met during his travels, in the first century. They didn't sit around debating in churches and different denominations whether he existed or not. But that's precisely what faith means in the context of theistic religious belief now. It means, it might as well mean, like I was watching Hansel and Gretel last night on Foxtel, it might as well mean trolls or witches, good witches or bad witches. It might as well mean Thor, Odin, Zeus, Apollo, the sun god Ra. It might as well mean a whole bunch of hundreds and hundreds of dead gods that lie in a mass grave called mythology. And so when I think of what sort of secrecy is it that the Freemasons want for themselves, I do think that they see themselves as Christianity's correctors, but it's more in the form of, well, we'd like to do business with you, we have things to sell to you, we can solve a bunch of your problems. But they've overreached as far as Roger and Gary are concerned from what they've taught me, and I did not feel comfortable being asked to be criminally complicit in, being misled. It was the fact that I never did get an eye shot of Roger's license, like in all his talk of research and neurology. I would think, well, show me your qualifications to do this, show me a license. I'd love to see that. Your clockwork studies. Meanwhile, I assumed every move I made while I was affiliated with the company was more or less subject to surveillance at any point in time anyway. In one sense, I found it meant I did not take my private life as I took it. I did not take it for granted. I cherished my time off work and my time with my friends. It did what God belief can do for some. I don't believe in the morality of telling someone that they're constantly being supervised, even supervised while masturbating, just because you think it's a useful disciplinary tool to help improve their aesthetic and performance ethic. I think that, but however, going well, you never know when the owners of this pharmaceutical chain could be prying into your private life, so don't go about assuming that anything's particularly private. And so I wouldn't, but where it got ridiculous is that Roger Tall in particular does not acknowledge the bisexual rights movement. He's a healthcare professional who would rather affirm the existence of any of the deities, supernatural beings in the mythology of Freemasonry, and yet hold at the same time that the bisexual rights movement isn't a valid sexual health identity. And so yeah, I think is a disaster. I think the means he's designed, he truly must have. I spent some time thinking about this. Like, how do you sustain as a religious apologist for any religion? It wouldn't have to be Freemasonry, but for any religion, with the resources that we have today, and the potentially quite good quality health system. Sometimes it can be a fight uphill to get what's needed, but to be saying things like the weak will perish and let's cull the population, the ones that don't want to work or that don't agree with our vision of the world, and as Roger doesn't agree with the Constitution of Australia, well, go back to Tasmania, fuck your mother, dig up her corpse. I'm sure you'll be saying the same thing by the time you ejaculate as you do of your token Freemason wife Maxine at present. They're both well worth the dig, huh? Roger Shaw and Gary Cans are not men of integrity. They don't even think that they're liable or at fault, or should be blamed for the fact that their tech doesn't turn up accurate results. Now, it doesn't work on... Epistemology is a branch of philosophy concerned with how we can know what we know, and is something just information? Is it knowledge? Is it hearsay? Is it gossip? Is it rumor? Is it fact? Is it fiction? Is it dream? Is it... until such time as technology is so well refined that they're able to measure without any margin for error, knowing full well that correlation of two events does not equal causation. I'll try and think of another example. You could let me think. You could be at a beach. Say you had two young children using buckets to make sand castles, and they'd made two towers out of sand next to each other, and you were saying to them, "Nice work with the twin towers there, kids." While visually in the back of in the recesses of your mind, where you visualize things, you're recalling a media report on the 9/11 plane crashes into the twin towers. So you're in a monologue. Your speech would be telling your kids that they built two cool sand castles or sand towers, stacked them next to each other, but your visual mind would be, thinking of the horrors of 9/11. Now, because and this is the thing, they don't think to eliminate that they can't use these as false multiplying principles for the measuring of any sort of data pertaining to human neurology and hope to be gaining indisputable certain results. They think seeing is believing, and they think hearing is believing, and they think that because their pathetic gods don't exist, never did exist. Roger, I am sure, must have had some success, and I wouldn't be surprised if he mail ordered his wife. The guy is retarded. I wouldn't be surprised if he lost his virginity when he was like 37. The logistics of the man, the lack of manners, the lack of decency, the lack of dignity, the lack of standards, the lack of... I never once heard him talk about the Capital Chemist mission statement, but now I'm starting to think that's because the missionary position Yeah, anyway, no, I'm starting to think I don't want to think about him and his missionary position. But this man was not supposed to have anything to do with the field of the study of neurology whatsoever. And he has been reported to foreign countries. He is a criminal. He's a criminal who's been absconding liabilities in the courts for about a decade now, at least. Hoping it'll all go away, because that's what faith is. Faith in the context of religion. And so here's one thing that people don't think about often is you ever thought of using a torch and then making bunny ears and casting up the shadow puppets on a wall? Now think about what goes on in the back of a person's mind when they're praying to, imagining a relationship with, or in, or, and praying to Jesus Christ. Now, they'll even use the terms like, oh, I want to be in the light with you. Lord, show me the light. Get me out of the darkness. Lead me into light. You are my bringer of light. O Lord, be my light and be my salvation. But if you are around a Christian male or a Christian female, compared to secular friends in your society, if you're a male and you have you're semi-well spoken, and you have long hair, and they could essentially do a pattern match in the back of their mind between your shadow and the like if you could imagine a chalk body outline around Jesus, then all the things that they were taught that they could expect to be properties of the character of Jesus, they'll start to transpose on and project onto you. They'll start to think that you'll save them from things. They'll start to think that you're worth being pacified or martyred or going down for something you didn't do. They'll start to think that you're here to on a mission to bear the sins of and attrition of the world upon you, all because of the outline of a shape. It's just and yet, and these are the industries interested in telling us all about things like psychology, psychiatry, and behavioral models, but they don't want to acknowledge the harm that their own religion is doing and has done. Christianity is a slave morality. It's a religion for slaves. Moses, in his epic scene, he leads the slaves out of the clutches of the Pharaoh through the desert. You're told in the Bible that he passes through the Red Sea. Then in the footnotes it says it may have been just called the Reed Sea or the Sea of Reeds, which is actually just a low tide marsh. So, they walked through a swamp. It's not quite the miracle where you have Moses holding a wand and an entire ocean splitting in two. But more interestingly is that he leads them up Mount Sinai and comes down with these stone tablets, in which he has 10 commandments. The second of which, thou shall make no graven images. That was actually the Muslims' take on that second commandment, is why the Danish cartoonist controversy kicked off, where the offense and the bombing of embassies and the people that died, or because someone drew a cartoon of Muhammad. That was their interpretation of the second commandment. Now, inclusive in the 10 commandments are rules laid down by Moses to the people he just freed from Egypt, the slaves he just freed from Egypt, on how that these people are to treat their own slaves. Imagine for a moment that these men and women don't want to have slaves. They've just spent a great amount of time being slaves, Moses has freed them, and they don't want to be slaves anymore, nor let's suppose that they don't want to be slaveholders either. Now, so Moses' commandments now seem like a new kind of fascism. They go, well, you just got us away from the Pharaoh, Moses. We're free from the clutches of the Pharaoh. Now you're trying to tell us how to lead and treat our own slaves. And then instead they take fancy to a golden bull because they're like, well, fuck this. Moses is talking out his ass, and this bull's quite decent, not telling us to make slaves out of anybody. And then Moses goes and smashes the stone tablets upon which the Ten Commandments were initially engraved and orders a mass suicide. And that's what Christianity is. It's a slave religion. Now, so long as you want, what made me sick of these Christians that get so fascinated with Christianity, then they feel the calling to study psychiatry and psychology because they think they're going to help people. What they're going to do is they're going to cause problems as religious leaders, and then they're going to abscond liabilities. They're going to cause problems as religious leaders, and then they're going to abscond liabilities by just redressing terms and saying, well, that's not their demon that's possessed them. It's the child. It's the pain in their heart from their childhood, and I've only ever wanted to help, and yeah, I make a living out of this, but and they're not double-hearted does not mean two-faced in the sense of a reprehensible roach of a hypocrite. And Gary Cairns and Roger Toll are two men who have truly proven that healthcare is to be hoard with all the veracity and respectability of the tongue, demeanor, and speech, and lying, profuse lying of a salesman who if you die from, and that's why they're interested in. See, at first I wish they had come forward and said what it was that they liked about me and my interest in Manson's art and Doppelhurst, the golden age of grotesque, fantastic era for Manson. But I thought, do you guys actually pay any interest in this sort of the ability to reinvent oneself as an artist and stay original and Bowie's influence? It's very apparent in Marilyn Manson. But they were just fascinated with Doppelhurst and that's because to them the three men lined up on the cross. See, it's sending a bad message, I argue, that Christians are teaching young kids. It's blinding. I think it could even cause sexual problems for them when they reach adulthood and maturity. If they're taught, rise again, second coming, he died for you. This death was for you. This death was for you. He was, if a grenade was thrown near your mum and Jesus jumped on the grenade, and the grenade blew up Jesus but saved your mum, then Jesus sacrificed his life for your mum. If his whole state was gathered around him to execute him, he was going to be executed either way. He did not lay down his life for a single fucking one of you. And it's disgusting. You think of those nails getting. I still listen to Jars of Clay and some of these Christian rock artists I used to listen to back when I was going to church, and what some of them do is that I still respect is they leave it up to you to be thinking about to yourself, well, what is the significance of Jesus' story to me? What does it mean to me? And it's possible for it to have some sort of meaning and for you to show some sort of respect. without having to be a commandment-keeping, obedient, church-attending, Hillsong worshipping, supernatural being believer. It doesn't mean you have to believe in sermons, in preaching. So I don't think Jesus died for nothing, but I don't find the crucifixion to be exciting at all. There's no good reason historically. No court today would read the four Gospels on Jesus Christ and say, well, here's a valid case to justify capital punishment and the execution of this man. No one would do that. So imagine that as he's getting nailed to the cross, they even put the nail through his 2 feet, the one hooked over the other, one nail into the left wrist, and one nail into the right. The crown of thorns was placed on his head as a gesture of mockery, because they had charged him with being the king of the Jews, and then sort of gone, well, here's your crown, then king. But imagine his central nervous system thudding for its last moments of life, and his perhaps imagining in his dying moments, one chance to see the person he loves the most. Because the interesting thing is, there's mockery in that crown of thorns. That's no one tends to debate that, but there's not really mockery so much in the placing of the loincloth on him. So can you imagine Jesus with this crown of thorns on his head, and he's still managing to keep up that gentle demeanor as he's been unjustly executed? In his heart, he's dreaming of someone he loves, and the nails into his nervous system, and the people hammering the nails into his head. Notice his dick jingling around a bit, and you Christians think that this is something to be thankful for, something to take pleasure in or delight in, and listen to the way you talk. Oh, he's risen. He's risen, and here comes the second coming. Oh, he's risen. I want to feel his salvation all over my face. He's risen. He's risen. He comes again. He's risen for the second coming. Okay, how many of the horrible names you have for the crucifixion process? It included a sex crime or a rape, more or less. And you should really bear that in mind. Instead, you've got the Christian church is homophobic, it's biphobic, it's condemned a woman who was not even part of God's original plan. Man's made in the image of God, but woman is made in the image of man, and as soon as she eats one apple, we have to do a murder on Jesus Christ. So what they said in effect was, well, this stupid woman ate an apple, so let's all get together and eat this man's whole body. And that also makes no sense. So, Freemasons and Christians I think they're as stupid as each other. And I really think Gary Cance and Roger Toll should have gotten tremendously high pressure extracurricular studies in which they excelled, both in fields of things like criminal psychology, criminal psychiatry, psychoanalysis, quantum physics, and all these other fields of study. Because they have wasted time. They've wasted so much time of my life that I'll never be able to get back. I want them in court so I can explain to a magistrate and a judge, just what they have cost me, because it certainly is a continuity of my right to life. And they are the two most repulsive men I've ever had the misfortune to encounter. My work for, I've had people mock and call me someone that they think. I mean, my early childhood's a matter of public record. It's been on the web most of my life. Recently pulled from Google searches, but big guess who it might be that would have wanted to have done that. It's nothing I've hidden from anyone, but it is something that I was mocked about because it put me in that Freemasons category of the week, and let's put a profile on Luke, but yeah, instead I'm just going to really call them on. I'm gonna have them explain in court what they think their integrity is, why they say Capital Chemist knows what matters, and why they deserve to be in healthcare. Gary and Roger belong to the pedmoronic era. I respect from the best I can tell from my studies of the Gospels. I like Jesus as he's portrayed in Mark's Gospel, which is considered the oldest and thus closest to when he was alive. It's repeated verbatim in Matthew's and Luke's, so that's both those authors are thought to have had pre-existent copies of Mark, and that they wrote off them. And then John's the weed smoker who said, yeah, God planned to send Jesus at the same time that he farted and made the Big Bang, and it's all wrapped up in a neat little package. And basically, Gary and Roger Toll are two men who would sooner say Jesus was a tomato, the Christian God incarnated into a tomato who was also a martyr. So he was a tomato sauce for mythology in Christianity. And they would sooner say that than say, well, maybe the bisexual rights movement is a legitimate sexual health movement that if we're healthcare practitioners we should admit exists. The bisexual rights movement exists. Their integrity doesn't. Their religion doesn't. And their license and qualifications to do anything but be pharmacists doesn't. So, I already know how this ends. It ends with managing partners expressing the disappointment at having the wool pulled over their eyes by frauds. They've caught me for standing up for my right to life. I caught a more serious criminal offender on just using text and some graphics on an online forum, and my method, which didn't involve painful inhumane mistreatment, just to try to get at facts. Roger's disgusting. I've heard him described as ruthless. he's ruthless in the sense that he's ruthless in the sense that he would do almost anything, I suppose, for a knight who would have paintings of himself put on the walls of Buckingham Palace right next to Rolf Harris's paintings, and a bunch of nude photos of young boys. He's ruthless in that kind of way, and that's the integrity of Roger Toll and Gary Kent's in some. They really don't deserve to be researchers because they're religious. So all they'll do is violate the Religious Discrimination Act and waste yours and my time, and I don't want it to happen to anyone else in Canberra. So someone has to fight him, I suppose it'll have to be me.